Hello and welcome to another Flightgear tutorial. Today I want to show you how to operate the Douglas DC3 airplane, and we will be flying around in Colombia because the main reason for making this tutorial for me is that I lately watched a documentary about these historical airplanes which are still operating in Colombia to supply remote areas, especially in the Amazon region of Colombia, with goods and also for passenger transport. So the route that I'm talking about is from the city of Villavicencio, which is located close to the capital Bogota. Here you can see the route that I already entered in the route manager. Sierra Kilo Double Victor, that's the Vanguardia airport in Villavicencio, and Sierra Kilo Bravo Oscar, that's the capital Bogota, so it's quite close to Bogota. And from there they are operating on a regular basis, flying into the rainforest, for example, to the airstrip in Sierra Kilo Lima Papa, that's La Pedrera, in the Amazon region. And this is the route that we will follow today as well. So we will also do a little bit of ADF navigation, because there is a non-directional beacon located on the airfield in La Pedrera, and this we will use for our final approach. So let's get into the cockpit. Okay. First, a little bit of configuration. You see, there is an auto start button. You can use it, but the startup procedure, I think it is nicely modeled and it is fairly simple. So I will do a manual startup just to show you how that is done. And I will disable all these options here. The yokes, of course, they are helpful when you're approaching and landing, but for the takeoff and for the cruise we don't need them, and they are a little bit in the way when we want to operate all those instruments now. So I will disable the yokes, the pilot, the co-pilot, and also the landing light cone. It looks quite unrealistic, this landing light cone, so I disable all the options. So now let's prepare for engine startup. First we have to prepare the fuel flow. We go to main left here with this selector, main left, and here we switch to main right. We go to the main tanks, also configure the fuel. The main tanks are number 1 and 2. We fill them up completely, and this should be sufficient for our 400 miles flight to La Pedrera. I want to keep a little bit of reserve in the auxiliary tank, so 250 pounds just in case of an emergency should do, so that we can switch. It is done by these rotary switches here. You can switch from the main to the auxiliary tanks in case you need it. Then we unlock the tail wheel so that the tail wheel is a little bit more flexible for taxi. This is the handbrake, so the wheel brakes are now active so that we don't start rolling immediately once we activate the engines. Now switch on the master battery to get electricity. Can already turn on the instrument lights. Then here we need the booster pumps, and of course the magnetos. We have to switch the left and right magneto to both, and now we should be ready to start up the engines. So we use the engine starters. First left, apply maybe 20% of throttle. Now it's running, and the right one. Both engines should be running. Let's check from outside. Okay, the plane is not moving. It means the wheel brakes are activated. The next thing, we can already activate the landing lights, left and right. We don't need the booster pumps, you need them only for startup, so we deactivate them again. Okay, and then you got a lot of levers here. These green levers are your throttles, so you can just use them by using your joystick configuration. The white levers are for the propeller pitch. You can choose between fine and coarse. Now they are on maximum fine, so to generate a lot of torque. But for taxi this is too much. To operate them, you can have a look in the help menu. It's under common aircraft keys. So propeller, pitch, fine, coarse. It's with minor, with capital N or with a lowercase n, November. And these red levers are to adjust the mixture. Once you are climbing, you're getting into thinner air, then you have to add less fuel to the air in your carburetors. So you also have to lean down the air mixture, the air gasoline mixture, and this is done by using the mic button. So November and mic are the two buttons. And I will now reduce the torque of the propellers by changing from fine to coarse propeller pitch. I leave the mixture to full rich for the time being. I will lean it down to auto rich once we are on our cruising flight level of 15,000 feet, flight level 150. Okay, we will not use flaps for takeoff. Or maybe it's better to use flaps position 1. Okay. To lift up the tail from the runway. Now. Let's check for the radio settings. Okay, we can adjust to the non-directional beacon later once we're up in the air. Then let's check the direction and the distance to La Pedrera. Sierra Kilo Lima Papa. See, it's 400 miles, bearing 151. So we will be using the autopilot, although in reality this plane does not seem to have an autopilot, but just for comfort, for convenience, we use it. Then vertical speed of 700 feet per minute should do. And our cruising speed will be 160 knots. That should ensure a moderate fuel consumption so that the main tanks are sufficient. Okay, we close it now, and we just remember 151 will be our course, so we will be turning to the right once we're off the runway. Okay, as I've entered the route in the route manager, I can also use the HUD to control the distance to La Pedrera. Here you see the 400 miles. This helps us to define the point in time when we have to descend from our cruising flight level. Okay, I press the wheel brakes. You see it's nicely animated here on those pedals, and release the parking brake. Okay. Now we will be rolling to the... You can steer using the wheel brakes if you have configured them, for example on a pair of pedals. Then you can use the left and right wheel brake independently, and this is something you absolutely need with this airplane, because this is your only way of steering as long as your tail wheel is still down on the ground. Okay, so we stop. More preparation must be done. First, lock the tail wheel to stabilize the plane again, otherwise it will be too to agile, and we go to maximum torque by using fine propeller pitch. Okay. One final look from outside. We should be ready for takeoff now. So I release the wheel brakes. And I keep the stick in a neutral position because I want the plane's tail to come up during the startup procedure. Okay, I use full throttle and still use the wheel brakes for fine-tuning to adjust. You see? The tail of the plane is coming up. I'm using the wheel brakes, but don't overdo it, otherwise the plane will nose over. Use only one wheel brake at a time. If you use them both, the plane will nose over. And now we can rotate and retract the wheel. It's very nicely animated, also the sound. Very well done by the developers of this plane. It's a very, very beautifully modeled plane. It's really worth trying this plane if you're into those old antique planes. This is one of the best and nicest models here in Flightgear. It also reacts very, very friendly. It is very user-friendly, and I think that this matches reality pretty well. So this is one of the reasons, apart from the low operating costs, that in Colombia people are still using this plane on a regular basis, that they are so faithful to this antique model. So in this documentary they mentioned different advantages that this plane has got. For example, you can land it even on gravel path airstrips in remote areas. It is very forgiving and it's very easy to handle, and it is also quite easy to maintain. This is why it can be operated over such an extremely long period of time. Okay, we are now already above our cruising speed of 160. We want to keep the speed at around 160. Now we have turned to 150 heading, and I will use the autopilot just for comfort. So heading and pitch. You pitch up, make sure that you have a positive climb, and also velocity control 160. Okay. Outside, there is another airstrip here on the right, and this is La Vanguardia Airport, and behind you can see the Cordillera, and behind these mountains there is the capital Bogota. That's where it is located. So starting from Villavicencio, that spares you from having to climb over those mountains. So it is already located in the lowlands, and now we're basically flying into the Amazon basin of Colombia. So it is not a mountainous route, it's mostly flat area, but it is difficult if you have to do an emergency landing because of all the trees. This is very difficult and dangerous, so you must maintain your plane in a good status so that you can avoid emergency landings. Okay, we have a steady climb rate. Now, next thing, cowl flaps. Here on the co-pilot side, there are switches for the cowl flaps. I will open them completely to make sure that the engines receive sufficient cooling, because with these old planes it's always critical the cylinder head temperature. I want to keep the cylinder head temperature around 200 degrees Celsius, and by opening the cowl flaps this helps maintaining healthy temperatures of the cylinder head. Let's have a look from outside what that looks like. These are the cowl flaps, and you can see they are opened to the maximum. This creates a little bit of extra drag and also consumes a bit of extra fuel, but I think it's worth not taking the risk of overheating your engines and having to go down in an emergency landing. So the cowl flaps. Now the next thing, propeller pitch. We are now on maximum fine propeller pitch. That means you are using with the maximum torque, but that's somehow like driving your car on the motorway always in first gear. You have a lot of torque, but you're overheating the engine and you're not getting very fast. So I will reduce the propeller pitch to go to a climb RPM of 2,500 instead of 2,750, which we have right now. So I use uppercase November to operate this white lever. Always carefully, first operate it a little bit and then watch the gauge, how it adjusts. Don't overdo it. So we maybe from the central pedestal position we can see this instrument better. Still a little bit more, but we must make sure. No, that was the wrong button. It must be uppercase November. I was hitting uppercase Bravo, and that operates the parking brake. So still a little bit less, but make sure that you keep your travel speed of 160. So at the moment this is okay. Now we are above 6,000 feet, and we can also lean down the mixture with uppercase mic, but I wouldn't go below auto rich. I experienced that if you go down, for example, to auto lean, even in high altitudes, you're losing engine power and you cannot maintain your cruising altitude and speed. So I will adjust it to the auto rich marker and keep it this way, and always have a good look if you are able to maintain your cruising speed. In our case it's 160 knots. Okay, so everything okay now. Now, how about the QNH? Before we were starting up, I checked the weather report and there was no weather report, so also no QNH information. That's why I simply used standard QNH, 2.992 inches, and we will keep it all the time. Before we are landing in La Pedrera, I will check again, but if there's still no weather information and no QNH, I will just keep the standard air pressure. That's good enough, because we are flying by visual flight rules. We're not doing something like an ILS, because there is no VOR and no ILS system in La Pedrera anyway, so that's good enough. If we have a few hundred feet altitude deviation, this will not really hurt us. See below there is another airstrip. There are quite many of them to supply all these little villages here in the remote area of eastern Colombia. Okay, that's all stable at the moment. Let's see what else can we do. Just to pass some time, we can drop a few paratroopers here, because this is a nice extra feature of this plane. I want to show you how to activate this while we are climbing to our cruise flight level of 15,000. I will adjust this here. 15,000 feet, but I keep the vertical speed here of 700. Okay, how is it done? to drop some paratroopers. There's a little trick that you must know. Of course, you have to open the parachute door, but if you open these double doors, it will not work. I wondered why that is, because I thought, well, these doors are wide open, so the paratroopers should be able to jump. So if I press the J button, Juliet, they should jump, but if I press it now, I receive this error message, paratroopers door closed. So what is the trick? Well, inside the left door there's another smaller door. And this is what you have to open, and then you can release those paratroopers, and it's a very funny sight. I will try it now. So let's click here, and now you see there is this little door inside the larger door, and this is the paratroopers door. So we can drop some of them now, and we will drop the last of them when we're on short final, while we are still in a reasonable altitude. So you can just press the J Juliet button, or to make it more realistic, here is the parachute signal. So we click it and have a look, and here they come. One after the other is jumping out. So, you stop this procedure. If you have to kill some time, remember you can always drop some paratroopers. We close the paratrooper door. Get into the cockpit again. Okay, we're above 10,000 feet, so we can deactivate the landing lights. Now, another thing we can do already is to prepare for navigation to the NDB in La Pedrera. Let's have a look at the map. Activate the nav IDs, and there you can already see the non-directional beacon. And to see the frequency, click on data, and there you see 315 kilohertz. That's what we enter into our radio stack. 315, activate, and once we're in reach of this signal, you will see that the double arrow here starts moving, and it will be pointing more or less upwards to 150. Let's have a look at the orientation of the runway. We are now on course 151, and fortunately enough, the runway is also oriented in almost the same direction, 154, so we can be coming straight in. We don't need to do any, we don't need to fly any additional maneuvers. We can get it right in the first try, just flying straight in into La Pedrera. So we are also prepared for that now. There's also a VOR navigation, but we will not use it. We will not use it today. But well, we can have a look if we see VOR here. For example, this one, just to demonstrate how this is done. But it's fairly easy. You're probably already familiar with this. So 113.3 megahertz. Radio stack 113.3, and now you can turn this dial here to aim for this VOR. There's no DME on board, so you don't have any distance information, so you have to triangulate if you want to encounter this. So you see, let's see if it's the correct direction. No. have to turn once more. 330, that's northbound, but we're flying to the southeast. So that was a 180 degrees deviation, and now we turn it around 180 degrees. And now you can see that the needle is adjusting, and this would be the path to the VOR, 160. And course 160 or 161, that would be the course to this VOR. So if we have no distance information, how do we know when we have to start our descent from the cruising flight level 150? Well, we're using a little cheat, as I have already entered the route into the route manager. You can either use the GPS settings with a GPS receiver, it tells you the distance, now it's 360 miles to go, or you can simply activate the HUD, and there you can see the distance, 362 miles, and this is what we will use at the end of our flight. When we're 80 miles out, we will start our descent. With this plane you can do quite a steep nosedive without picking up too much speed. You know, this plane, it creates a lot of drag with its wings and propellers and stuff, so you're not bound to overspeed so easily, even if you do a steep descent from your cruising flight. As you can see, we are now losing speed, so I will reduce the climb rate. This is the first thing you can do. If you are getting too slow, you can reduce the climb rate. If that doesn't help, you can increase the propeller pitch, and yeah, these are your main instruments to keep your cruising speed. We will soon be reaching our target flight level 150, and then things will be easier anyway, because then when we are in level flight and don't need to climb, then we can reduce the propeller pitch even more, maybe to 2,250 revs per minute. So 1,500 feet to go. Just to make sure that we are reaching our cruising speed again, I will maximize the propeller pitch, so to maximum fine. That cranks up the revs per minute, gives us a little extra boost at the moment. Still, the cylinder head temperature is more than good enough. Here below 200, that's not critical. If you're above 250 degrees Celsius for a longer time, you have to do additional measures. Mostly reducing your climb rate will help releasing your engines from too much stress. So climbing always means a lot of stress and a lot of also thermal stress on the engines. Then just reduce your climb rate and take it easy, and then your cylinder head temperature should normalize. So we're on the final 1,000 feet. 500 feet per minute is still a pretty decent climb rate for a plane of this kind. You can see with the throttle you are operating the manifold pressure of the engines, and keeping a manifold pressure of around 40 is also safe. So that's something you can sustain over a longer period of time. So all the parameters are okay now. Soon we will be reaching our target flight level, and you can see that this today it coincides pretty well, the altitude that is shown on your altimeter and in the HUD. It does not necessarily coincide completely. Sometimes there are a few hundred feet of deviation, and then if you want to use the altitude hold option, you have to do some correction. Yeah. So if you go to altitude hold, 15,000. it should soon stop. Today it's almost a perfect match between the HUD indication and the altimeter. Now the plane should level off by itself. So you see the vertical speed, here's the vertical speedometer, it goes down to 0, and now it should simply keep the current altitude, and now we will reduce the propeller pitch to a cruising value of maybe 2200 revs per minute. So with an uppercase November, we will subsequently reduce. And you see this auto throttle, it also reduces the throttle here automatically to maintain our cruising speed of 160. Okay, still go to a more coarse propeller pitch. You can also hear how the propellers are slowing down. So on that side. Always make sure that you are keeping your cruising speed. Even a little bit more. The central pedestal view, you can see the instruments better. Okay. And this is it for the first part, the takeoff and climb, and now we do a little time warp, so I will stop the video recording and restart it once we are 100 miles out from our destination La Pedrera. So see you back again in a moment. Okay, so here we are back again with the final part of our flight to La Pedrera. So we're 100 miles out. We will start our descent when we're 80 nautical miles out. So let's check a few parameters. First of all, we get some weather information now. So we have a low air pressure, 1010 hectopascal. We will adjust this value once we are below transition level. When we have descended to 5,000 feet, I will switch the QNH to 1010 in the altimeter. Then I think we have deviated a little bit from our path. So let's check for the GPS direction. 158 it is now. So heading, instead of 152, 158. And as you can see, we are already receiving the signal from the La Pedrera NDB. So this also coincides with the value that we just entered for the heading. It's a little bit below 160, so we're heading 160. So we can, from now on, we can also rely on the ADF signal here in our instrument. Okay. We can leave the mixture to auto rich. We can reduce the propeller pitch even more to. Now we can leave it this way and just start our descent. I don't think we will pick up too much speed. Pitch a little bit coarser. Doesn't matter if we do speed now because we will pick up more speed once we are descending. Okay, we don't need the map because now we have our ADF instrument and this will be good enough. It's pointing a little bit to the right, so we will still adjust, let's say, to 160. And we will be descending to 5,000 feet. Okay, so now we initiated the descent a little bit earlier, but that doesn't matter. It's okay. Let's also check the fuel. So we still got enough fuel in the main tanks. There's no need to switch to the auxiliary tanks yet because we have double the amount in the main tanks anyway than in the auxiliary tanks, so it would be useless to switch now. If you experience a sudden stall of your both engines, most of the time you have a fuel problem. At least for me that was the case, and then you have to make sure that the fuel flow is okay, that you still got enough fuel, and you can restart the engines in the air. It's no problem. You have to activate the booster pumps, and then you just press the 2 starter switches here and they will restart again. As long as you get enough fuel, you will be able to restart the engines also in the air. I think this is also a feature that is important for those pilots in Colombia in real life, that they have their checklist how to restart the engines in case of an engine failure. Also, the plane is a very good glider, so if you're close to an airfield, then you can also reach it just by gliding without engines. So the plane is very easy to handle and very well managed. Okay, so fuel is also okay. We have already passed 3/4 of our trip to La Pedrera, so that should be more than enough to do this final approach. So we are descending and we keep our speed of 160. Also, we don't want to speed up in an uncontrolled manner. And we can reduce the propeller pitch even more. Not with the Bravo, but with the November key. We can reduce it down to 2000. Okay. Important. Tail wheel must be locked for touchdown. And we can reduce the propeller pitch. Below 10,000 feet, we will activate the landing lights again. Okay, our course is okay. We're descending. We're now 80 miles out. Okay, and not to bore you with this, I will use time compression. 4 times should do. And let's watch the parameters. Let's not speed up and keep a constant sync rate. 1000 feet per minute should do. We want to go down to 5000 feet, and that should be below transition level, and then we can already adjust the QNH. And when we're approaching La Pedrera, there are a couple of reference points. There is a huge river. I think it's one of the rivers sourcing the Amazon. So you will notice when we're passing it, it is shortly before you have visual of the runway. And directly on the right of the runway, there is also a mountain that you can use for orientation. But watch out, this mountain also poses a danger when in very bad visibility. If you're flying through the clouds, you have to make sure when you're just blindly following the ADF signal, you are bound to collide with that mountain. So if you have zero visibility, you better keep a little bit more to the left in case of doubt than to the right, to make sure that you do not collide with that mountain, which is very close to the runway. We should stop at 5000. Okay, the plane is leveling by itself, and now we adjust the QNH. Have another look in the weather report. If you don't see anything, if you cannot see the text, because of the rendering, you can just zoom in and that should, in most of the cases, solve the problem. So it's still 1010 hectopascal. So we go for the instrument settings, but you can either use this panel here or you can turn this dial here. Go down to 1010. That's okay. Now we are adjusted to the correct QNH air pressure, and the plane should ascend to 5,000 again after this correction. Let's check the course. It should still be something around 160. That seems to be okay. And we can also make the propeller pitch a little bit coarser. So, that should be okay. From outside. And now that we've still got some time, we can drop our remaining paratroopers. Make sure you open the correct door. It's the smaller door and not the double doors. And before we have to concentrate for the short final, we will drop our paratroopers. So parachute signal, and here they go. Okay, this was it. Paratroopers. Closing that door. So we're 50 miles out. I will compress the time again until we are 20 miles out, and I will also reduce the speed. Let's say 30 miles out. Okay. Let's turn on the landing lights. And we switch to the propeller pitch to 5 to have some safety margin in case we have to go around and fly some tight turns or maneuvers. So the course is still okay. See, there is this huge... No, that's just a lake. This huge river will be visible once we're something around 20 miles out. Let's have a look at the map. So this was our complete path, and now we're on the final miles before La Pedrera. Speed up. We can already reduce the speed. 40. No, that was not the speed, that was the heading. Totally wrong. And that's when you operate the autopilot while you're in time compression mode. Okay, we're 30 miles out. Let's reduce speed to 120. And let's reduce our altitude to 3000. I think from now on we will completely rely on visual. We have our two reference points, this large river and also this mountain close to the runway, and we keep a good look at our ADF instrument with the double arrow. So 158. Let's see what the GPS indicates. 157. We have to be slow enough to lower the flaps, so you shouldn't lower the flaps if you're much faster than 100 knots. There is a checklist down here which tells you your maximum speed when you are in different phases of your flight. Also the revs per minute are indicated. This is your reference point for orientation. Final 85, so we will be trying to touch down with a speed of around 80 knots. So no more preparation to be done. Let's check some more parameters. Cylinder head temperature is pretty high, so I will reduce the propeller pitch again. Use full rich mixture. This is a high cylinder head temperature. But now with this low speed, it should adjust again. Also, after we have touched down, I will reduce the propeller pitch again for taxi, because otherwise even idle throttle could be too much for taxiing. You constantly have to press the wheel brakes and then you're always bound to nose over, so that's very stressful and inconvenient. So I suggest for taxi you just reduce the propeller pitch to reduce the engine's torque. So how about GPS? We're still 26 miles out. We can compress time again until we see that river. It's not this one, it's much larger. See, cylinder head temperature has dropped to 200 degrees Celsius, that's okay. Final check of the fuel. You don't want to run out of fuel on short final. So we can switch to auxiliary, left auxiliary, and right auxiliary. And now we should be taking fuel from the auxiliary tanks number 0 and 3 instead of 0 and 3 instead of 1 and 2. Here is the river. So now we are really close. The river goes in a wide loop here. And now we are really close to our destination. We will switch to manual controls. No time compression anymore. And also reduce the speed to 100 so that we can extend the flaps. Go for maximum propeller pitch. And deactivate the autopilot. And now all we do is just follow the ADF signal. Now we're on manual controls, reduce the throttle, and make sure we're on maximum flaps position when we arrive at the airfield of La Pedrera. In reality, this airstrip, it is paved with concrete, and at the end there is a little extra gravel path in case you overshoot the regular runway. This gravel path is of course not meant to be used for startup. It's just a safety margin in case you're coming in too fast. Some more flaps. Paratroopers already. We're constantly descending. Turn a little to the left to avoid that hill. And once we get this hill in sight, we should also be able to see the runway pretty soon. Today visibility is very good, so we're already below the cloud level. That helps us identifying the airstrip. Once we have the runway in sight, we will also lower the gear. 22, flaps 22 degrees, 30 degrees is maximum. So we have one more flaps position to go. Now you can clearly see that mountain, and we can already see this white landing light on the left of the mountain. This is the beginning of our runway. So from now on, you can see here the ADF, it points to the right, but that's not the way we want to go, because otherwise we would collide with the mountain. Now we just focus on that white landing light, and this will be guiding our path to the runway. So we keep left of that mountain, then we are safe. And final look at the fuel. Don't want to run out of gas on your final few meters. If that happens, we have to switch to the main tanks again very fast. So the engines, they are stalling not only when you are on the last drop of fuel in your activated tanks, but even 100 pounds before that. Here it is. no, it's still okay. Okay. And now we have been finally running out of fuel. To main and activate the booster pumps. Restart the engines. And we're good to go again. If it happens again, then we have to cheat with the fuel. So now we're using, you see, the engines were stopping at 165 pounds to go. So we're coming in at the last drops now. If it happens again. So I'd rather gain a little altitude so that we can just glide in. So now you had a first-hand experience what it is like to restart the engine's emergency procedure at a low altitude. Okay, I take up the flaps to reduce the drag now, but I think the fuel should be okay for now. Now, as we have no visibility, we just keep the plane in a stable position. Just keep it level with a constant sink rate. Okay, from now on we could also be gliding, even if we run out of fuel. It wouldn't be a tragedy. So let's go down in a nosedive, but that's no problem because this plane, it will not speed up like crazy. It will still be okay. Maximum flaps and gear down. Of course we are a little bit too high now, but especially being so low on fuel, I don't want to go around. I'll just try to attempt the landing now, and I think we'll be fine. Quite fast for the landing, but still good enough. Using alternating wheel brakes, don't use both wheel brakes at the same time, otherwise your plane will nose over. But if you use them only one at a time, always alternating between left and right, you can shorten the runway length quite drastically. And that was it. No problem. So, still pitch up to press the rear wheel onto the runway. Go to a coarse propeller pitch. You see how I'm alternating the wheel brakes not to nose over. And now we should be slow enough. Now for taxi, we can also unlock the tail wheel. We're on our final meters. So retract the flaps. and get ourselves off the runway, also off the extension of the runway, in case another plane is overshooting the runway. You don't want to stand in the way in this safety margin zone. Okay. So use the dual brakes for steering. And as there is not a real gate modeled on this airfield, we will simply stop our plane here, activate the parking brake, and deactivate the magnetos to shut down the engines. Shut down the battery and set the squawk to standby. So here we are in La Pedrera in the Amazon region of Colombia. So after a quite turbulent flight with some incidents, we managed to touch down successfully. So that should give you a little impression of how it is flying through Colombia in these antique but very reliable Douglas DC3. We're at the end of today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching and see you again next time. Goodbye.